Okay, well, thanks, Tom, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. As Tom said, my name is Gil McGowan, and I am one of the candidates running to become the next leader of the NDP here in Alberta, and hopefully the next premier of our province. This is actually the fourth platform release since I launched my campaign about a month ago. So we started with a campaign plank on jobs and the economy. We moved on to a campaign plank about wages, the need to give Albertans a raise. And then last week we had a campaign plank on affordability. And as Tom said, today we're going to be talking about healthcare. So there's nothing more important or foundational to the lives of Albertans than health. Simply put, if we are not healthy, everything else falls apart. That's why alarm bells should be ringing in Alberta. Under the UCP, the system that is supposed to protect our healthcare is falling apart. In fact, it's being deliberately pulled apart. Like many conservatives before them, the UCP is clearly trying to make the system fail so they can justify privatizing it. But even more ominously, the UCP seems to be in the thrall of extremists who reject the scientific foundations upon which good healthcare and modern medicine is based. As leader of the NDP and eventually premier of this province, I would keep Albertans healthy by re-embracing public health care and by defending the practice of public health. Let me break it down for you. First, let's talk about the need to fix primary care. The foundation of a healthy, functioning healthcare system is primary care. We can't have a healthy community or a healthy economy if individuals don't have reliable access to a family doctor. Unfortunately, under the UCP, our primary care system is now on life support. The number of family physicians in the province has fallen far behind population growth. Literally hundreds of thousands of Albertans don't have a family doctor, and the situation is set to get worse. 1 in 5 family doctors say they are thinking about retiring, leaving the field, or leaving the province. But it doesn't have to be this way. Every other Western province now pays their family physicians substantially more than Alberta. For example, in just the last 6 months, BC has attracted nearly 1,000 new family doctors with its new funding model. So it can be done. Here's what I would do. First, I would work with doctors and other stakeholders to develop and implement a funding model that would allow Alberta to attract and retain more family doctors. I would provide physicians with separate funding streams for income and for overhead. Second, I would push for a province-wide system of primary care clinics that would be operated entirely within the public system. These clinics would be one-stop shop, multidisciplinary hubs where patients could access all healthcare professionals that they need, including family physicians, nurse practitioners, dietitians, social workers, you name it. All the staff would be paid a salary as opposed to fee-for-service, including the physicians. Third, I would fund more spaces in our medical schools to train more doctors right here in Alberta. I would also expand programs that provide incentives for new grads to practice in Alberta outside of the 2 major cities. That leads me to the second big challenge facing our healthcare system, and that challenge is the staffing crisis. In addition to the shortage of family doctors, we have an acute shortage of literally all other health professionals, including registered nurses, registered psychiatric nurses, and paramedics. Emergency rooms, especially in rural Alberta, were forced to close for more than 38,000 hours in 2023. The reason? Not enough staff. At the same time, acute care hospitals in both large cities and smaller cities are regularly running at over 100% capacity every day, with long waiting times and hallway healthcare becoming the norm rather than the exception. As Premier, I would take the following steps to address the staffing crisis in healthcare. Number 1, respect. Our healthcare system has already functionally collapsed. It's only being held together by sheer force of will of frontline workers who have been going above and beyond the call of duty literally for years now, especially in the context of the pandemic. Despite this fact, the UCP has gone out of their way to disrespect these very workers. I would bring respect back to healthcare workplaces. Second, pay increases. The people who work in our healthcare system are motivated by a desire to help their fellow citizens provide the best quality of care to their patients. But they all have bills to pay, and those bills are getting bigger and bigger every day. It is completely unacceptable for our provincial government to expect frontline healthcare workers to continue to working for wages that don't keep up with inflation, especially when literally all other provinces are offering substantial wage increases. I would budget for annual wage increases that keep up with inflation and for wage increases that exceed inflation for occupations where shortages are particularly acute. Third, nurse-patient ratios. The quality of care in our healthcare facilities depends on having enough staff to deal with a patient load which is growing both in numbers and complexity. When there are too many patients and too few staff, quality of care suffers and our frontline workers burn out. I would address these problems by following the lead of the BC New Democratic government, which introduced clearly defined nurse-patient ratios and provided $250 million to hire new nurses so those ratios can actually be met and respected. Fourth, acute care beds. Our healthcare system has been in an almost constant state of crisis ever since the so-called era of austerity in the 90s and early 2000s, which led to a dramatic reduction in acute care beds in Alberta hospitals. As Premier, I would set a target of moving Alberta closer to the OECD average of 3 to 4 acute beds per 1,000 people compared to the basement where we're in right now of 1.8 beds per 1,000 people. This would require expansion of existing hospitals and the construction of new ones in growing areas of the province. I would start with the construction of a long overdue hospital in South Edmonton. Fifth, a healthcare workforce strategy. Given the acute and ongoing staffing crisis that is crippling our healthcare system, it is imperative that the Alberta government develop a comprehensive healthcare workforce strategy that identifies problems and very clearly and intentionally lays out the solutions. The plan needs to address multiple issues, including training, because we need more seats in nursing and other programs, remuneration, because we need to attract and retain skilled staff, and working conditions, because we can't keep driving healthcare workers away from their professions and out of the province. I would make the development of a healthcare workforce strategy a top priority, both as an opposition leader and as Premier. That brings me to my third big area for action and the final one that I'm going to highlight this afternoon, and that is the area of public health. Healthcare in Alberta is buckling, partly because we don't have enough staff to work in the system, but also because demand on the system is increasing as our population gets sicker and less healthy. In order to turn things around, we need to both increase the supply of staff, so doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals, but we also need to reduce demand from patients. In this regard, it's crucial for Albertans and policymakers alike to connect the dots between the UCP's abandonment of public health and the growing wave of sick and disabled Albertans. Public health is the branch of medicine that deals with prevention and keeping the whole population healthy through science-based rules and collective action. Examples of public health include regulations, standards to keep our food and water supply safe. Other examples of public health include vaccination campaigns and protocols for isolation and masking in the face of outbreaks and pandemics. Sadly, under the UCP, control of this important branch of our healthcare system has essentially been handed over to anti-science, anti-vax, and anti-mask extremists, the people who are pulling Premier Daniel Smith's strings. This became evident when the UCP censored health officials who, this past fall, wanted to tell Albertans about the scientifically proven benefits of getting flu and COVID shots. It was also evident when the UCP passed legislation putting decisions about public health into the hands of politicians instead of the hands of public health experts. In order to appease her anti-vax base, Daniel Smith has also essentially abolished the position of Chief Medical Officer of Health in Alberta, effectively neutering the whole public health apparatus in the process. Smith's war on public health is also at the heart of her decision to dismantle AHS. Never again does she want to have a coordinated and effective province-wide strategy for dealing with public health emergencies in Alberta. Given the significant negative impacts associated with the UP's utter capitulation to what I call the convoy crowd, as opposition leader and as premier, one of my top priorities would be to reassert the importance of public health in Alberta. Specifically, I would do the following things. First, I would launch an aggressive and ongoing public education campaign about the value and importance of public health to counter the lies and misinformation being spread by anti-vax and anti-science groups, including the UCP. Second, I would tear up the UCP's anti-public health legislation and return responsibility to public health to public health experts where it belongs. Third, I would hire an independent chief medical officer of health with the resources and mandate to build and maintain a public health system that prioritizes people over politics. Fourth, because COVID is not over, it's not mild, and because it's running rampant in our workplaces, especially our schools, I would introduce enforceable standards for indoor air quality, including standards for monitoring, ventilation, high UV, and air filtration. Fifth, I would reintroduce masking guidelines in schools and healthcare facilities when the risk of infection is high, because there are no effective therapeutics, and the best way to keep Albertans, especially school-aged children, safe from COVID is to make sure that they don't get it in the first place. Sixth, I would require employers to provide and pay for appropriate PPE, for example, N95 masks. Seventh, I would amend the Occupational Health and Safety Code to make the right to refuse unsafe work a collective right that can be used by workers in the context of pandemics and airborne illness. Those are the main elements of my healthcare plank. So I'll just close by reiterating what I said at the start. We're engaged in a leadership race right now, not a general election. And as such, we need to choose a leader who has a strategy to win. That strategy starts with identifying who's currently outside of our political tent, figuring out why they're outside the political tent, and then developing strategies to bring them in. As I've said in the debate recently, and thanks to many of you for sending such kind words to beat me up by email and direct message in response in the aftermath of that debate. But as I said in the debate, the missing piece in our winning coalition is working people. The polling shows that working people, people with high school education, college, and trades education are voting disproportionately for the UCP. If we want to build the winning coalition that we need to defeat the UCP in 2027 and beyond, we have to find a way to bring them back to the NDP. As I've said previously, the way to bring them back is to present an economic plan to create jobs in a changing global economy. We bring them back by introducing policies that will raise wages at a time of rising cost of living. And also we need to become the party of affordability by reducing costs. And finally today, I said that we need to make an offer to working Albertans and their families about how to keep them healthy in a world where there are increasing health risks. Other measures. That's where I have to stop there. I was reading some notes, but I'm going to stop there. But what I've tried to lay out for you today is the fourth plank, which I think is an example of what we can do as a party to put on the table as an offer to working Albertans to convince them that we are their party, we are their political home, and that if we take this kind of approach of targeting working families who are currently outside of our coalition, this is the way to bring them back, build that winning coalition so that we can do the job that we're all after, which is defeating Daniel Smith and the UCP in 2027. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and I'll throw it back to you, Tom, and I'm happy to answer any questions from any members of the media who might be with us today. And then after that, I'm happy to open the floor for questions from anyone else who's joined us today. Over to you, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Gil. Nice to hear some plan on how we're going to get rid of the UCP and with the new Democrat government. So what we're going to do in this part is people could use the little Zoom hand It's the little hand that you can raise, and it's probably on your screen at the bottom, maybe under the More button. It shifts around a little bit. Put up your name, put up your hand to show that you'd like to ask a question, and then I'll make it possible for you to unmute yourself, and we can move ahead. So I have quite a few questions already. That's terrific. Matt, can I go to you first? Matt McAvoy.
MacGyver.
MacGyver.
My question is what's the health strategy for Red Deer? We've been basically in an expansion or new hospital since the late 90s. What's the ideas?
Well, as I mentioned, my goal would be to bring Alberta up to the OECD average in terms of the number of acute care hospital beds in the province, and that involves expanding existing facilities and building new ones. The Red Deer Hospital has been on the list for a very long time. I think it even goes back to the last PC government, and then through the New Democrat years, and now it's still a project that needs attention. So I know people in Red Deer have heard this over and over again from politicians from multiple parties, and so you may not, find me any more persuasive than them. But I've been in Red Deer. I've knocked on doors for our party in Red Deer in the last 2 elections, and I've seen the need. It's the fastest growing community in the province, and it's bordering on criminal that this project, which has been on the drawing board for so long, hasn't gotten off the ground. So I would make a commitment that in addition to building the South Edmonton Hospital, that the hospital in Red Deer would also be a top priority for me.
Thanks, Gil. We've got Breezy Brian, who would like to ask a question.
Hi, Breezy.
Breezy Brian Gray.
Yeah.
Hi, Gil. Thanks very much. I'd like to know, I wish I could have run in this leadership race myself, because I would have liked to ask some questions, but I don't really qualify because I don't really want the job of leading the party. But I would like some of the candidates to say things like, why don't we have production caps on the oil industry? Why don't we double the royalties? And why don't we have a sales tax like other provinces in Canada?
Okay, well, thanks very much for the question, Breezy. Oh, what's that?
Other than the electability answer.
Well, I think you might be surprised to hear what I have to say on some of those issues. So, for example, on royalties, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we should increase the royalties that we're getting, especially from the oil sands. For those who aren't familiar with the royalty regime, we are still laboring under the penny on the dollar royalty regime that was introduced by Ralph Klein way back in 1997. And at the time, the argument was made that we had to have an extremely low royalty rate for the oil sands in order to attract investment. But that was questionable at the time, but it stopped even being defensible at all when the price of oil went through the roof in the early 2000s. And so basically what the regime says is that companies can pay a penny on the dollar royalty until they pay off their capital expenses. But companies very quickly learned how to game the system. So every time they were getting close to the threshold at which the royalties would kick up to a higher rate of 20 or 30%, they just built another expansion. And they said, oh, look, we haven't paid off our capital expenses. So we've produced literally trillions of dollars of worth of resource from the oil sands, and we've only got a small fraction of that value as the owners of the resource coming back to us as the owners. And that was unacceptable. Now it's particularly unacceptable. It was unacceptable then. It's particularly unacceptable now because the old compact that we had with the oil companies was that we would basically give away the resource, and in exchange, we get a lot of jobs. But what's been happening over the last few years is that companies have broken that deal. and the number of people working full time in the oil and gas sector has dropped from about 185,000 in 2014 to about 140,000 now. That's partly been driven by the fact that oil companies, including the big oil sands majors, are, and pardon my language, automating the crap out of everything. And so they're producing more with fewer people. But also, I think it's important for Albertans to take a look at the behavior of these big oil sands corporations, because it has changed significantly since 10 years ago. In the old days, during the boom times, they reinvested almost all the profits in new production, and that not only led to more production, but also more jobs. But right now, even though these companies are recording record profits, they're not putting it into new production. They're not putting it towards job creation. Instead, they're using it to fund stock buyback schemes, to increase dividends for investors, most of whom don't even live in Alberta. So that big gushing sound you hear is the value of our resources going out of the province without creating jobs. So that's a long way of saying that now that they've broken the deal, it's time for us to renegotiate the deal. And that means increasing royalties. So if they're not going to create jobs, and they're just going to sort of ride the demand curve down as the world transitions away from fossil fuels, we own the resource. And so I would, and I will announce more details on this later, but I would dramatically increase the royalties, especially on the oil sands. So that's one question. The second question was sales tax. There's an old Alberta saying that about the so-called Alberta trifecta, right? So no rats, no sales tax, and no Liberals. I think that's still true to a large extent. So I would not be in favor of introducing a sales tax here in Alberta, because, as some people have said, it's the PST, or political suicide tax. I don't want to commit political suicide. I want us to win the next election. So that's not a policy that I'd be willing to embrace. Having said that, we do have a broken revenue system. We only collect about 70 cents on every dollar that we need to pay for our public services, including education and healthcare. That's not sustainable. We've been relying on windfall oil and gas revenue to fill that gap for the better part of 50 years. And given the fact that the oil and gas sector is always up and down, and now we're looking at the prospect of a transition away from oil and gas, especially for fuels, which is a big chunk of what we produce. That the system that we have has never been sustainable. It's particularly unsustainable right now, and so we need to have an adult conversation about how we raise revenues and pool them to pay for the public services that we need. And so I will be releasing a plank, my 7th plank. I'm on my 4th today, but my 7th plank will go into detail about how we deal with our broken revenue system. And I know that this is particularly important for the New Democrats, because we believe in public services. We believe in a strong role for government in the economy. And we also believe that tax is not a 4-letter word. So if we're not willing to have a conversation about government revenue and how we pay for our public services, then who will? And without that conversation, the reality is that we won't be able to continue affording the public services that we need to act as a foundation for our economy, supporting our families, our businesses, and our communities. So that's why my 7th plank will, I'll go there. I'm going to go there but I want to make it really clear. My intention, the plan that I'm going to lay out is going to basically say no tax increases for 90% of the public. We are going to be talking about asking profitable corporations and wealthier Albertans to pay their fair share, which they have not been. So I hope that gives you answers to your questions.
All right, Lawrence, you had your hand up. Do you have a question for Gil?
I did have a question for Gil, but actually he just answered that question quite skillfully after I was just going to ask, where's all the money coming from for all this? Because it sounds great, but you completely cut covered it there for me, so I am good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right, and we have a question that has been typed in, so I'm just going to read it to you. It's from Susan, who says, disabled folks are constantly let out of any plan where healthcare is concerned. What would you do as Premier to help them achieve a more affordable lifestyle?
Well, thanks, Susan, for the question. And I didn't mention disabled Albertans in my presentation, but there is a discussion of issues, healthcare issues related to the disabled community in the full plank on the website. So I encourage you to read it. But I'll just sort of summarize what we talk about there. And basically, what I'm proposing is in relation to home care, because right now there are about 127,000 Albertans, so a very significant number of our fellow citizens who depend on home care services to live independent lives in their homes. But as I say in the plank, which we've just released today, the system is a broken patchwork. It's a patchwork of some public coverage, some private coverage. None of it is enough, and the hours of care that are provided through the public system are completely inadequate. The system also exploits frontline workers, most of whom are new immigrants or racialized women. They don't provide them security. They pay them very poorly. And so the quality of care is insufficient. And so, one of the things that I'm proposing, and I think this is consistent with New Democrat, social democratic values, is that we need to bring these services fully under the Medicare umbrella. And I want to be really clear what I'm saying here. If I were to become Premier, I would start the process of bringing home care into the public system, fully into the public system, and funding it properly. I would also start the process of bringing long-term care and continuing care fully into the public system. We have far too many, private for-profit companies that are in the home care space, in the long-term and continuing care space. And we saw during the pandemic just how abysmally they performed in terms of providing service to the Albertans who are in the home care or long-term care facilities, and in fact, people lost their lives because of the substandard care. So, I'm a big believer, and I think most New Democrats are, that our healthcare system, including long-term care and home care, should be delivered based on what's best for patients, not what's best for the profits of private corporations. So yeah, I'm making a commitment to bring home care fully within the system, and that's a major support for the disabled. Having said that, Susan, I want to be really honest. I'm a labor guy. I've spent 20 years advocating for working people, and I'm proud of the work that I've done with our unions. So I know about labor law. I know about occupational health and safety. I know about economic issues related to job creation. I know about pensions. But the disability area is not an area where I spend a lot of time working. And so with that in mind, so I'm just, I guess you don't hear this from politicians that often, is I don't know enough about this area. But you raise a really important question. And I guess I'm just going to commit to you that I would work with you and other members of the disabled community to make sure that we get a system that supports all Albertans, including disabled Albertans.
Okay, Gil, I'm going to take another question that's being typed in, and it's from Karen. She writes, "Hi, Gil, two things. The first is, are you committing to reversal of the current restructuring of the Alberta Health Service?
Yeah.
And second, there is a worldwide shortage of health professionals, and while increased funding can help, have you thought about how we might grow our own health professionals? For example, students from First Nations communities do not, for the most part, have access to the required K-12 education required for entry into university and college, STEM programs. Have you thought about this as part of your health workforce strategy?
Those are great questions, Karen, and thank you for asking them. On the first question about the UCP's restructure, they call it refocus, but really what they're doing is breaking apart AHS and replacing our province-wide health authority with 4 new authorities. Only one of them has been announced so far, the so-called Recovery Alberta, which has, somehow they think it's wise to lump mental health together with addictions treatment, even though majority of people who need mental health care are not suffering from addiction. So your question is, would I reverse those changes? And you betcha. You may have noticed that in the debate, one of the other candidates, Naheed Nenshi, specifically said that he would not reverse the changes because and he made the point that it's not fair for people in the system to swing from one big change to another. It's very disruptive, and I agree with that point. However, the changes that the UCP are in the process of implementing are so fundamental, so diametrically opposed to what we as New Democrats think of as best practice for healthcare. I think we would have to swing the pendulum back. We would have to. We have no choice. And so you'll see in my platform, and this is part of the platform that I didn't address in my opening remarks, but it's there on the website. I would commit to, even if it's 3 years from now and they've managed to make these changes, I would commit to returning to a province-wide health authority, partly because it delivers economies of scale, but it also, as we saw during the pandemic, it allows us to respond more quickly and more effectively to public health emergencies. The problem was not that that AHS was a one province-wide authority. The province was that it was not properly funded. I have heard from a lot of our own frontline healthcare workers who I actually work very closely with, that there's a problem of over-centralization. And so what I would support a province-wide system, but there's no reason why you can't have more local decision-making control. So I would have more local decision-making control, because I'm a big believer that the people closest to the problem are usually in the best position to deal with the problem. And so yeah, I would keep the province-wide system and provide mechanisms for more local decision-making. On the training side, you'll also see on the website, we've prioritized training healthcare professionals right here in Alberta. And that's also would be a major part of the health workforce strategy that I mentioned. Because as you very accurately said, I mean, there's a healthcare worker shortage all over the world, and wealthier countries like Canada should not be addressing their problems by poaching workers from other countries. I think that's not a long-term solution. It's also contrary to our values in terms of, trying to be good international citizens. And so, yeah, I think that we should be dramatically increasing the number of seats in all our healthcare related professions. So doctors, nurses, other allied health professionals. We have a particularly acute shortage of anesthetists, and without them, we can't do surgeries. So that's an example. I really like your idea about reaching out to Indigenous communities and creating pathways for them to get into health professions, because our Indigenous communities are some of the fastest growing communities in the province. They also have a younger population than the whole Alberta population. So you put fast growing groups of young people who are looking for opportunities, and why shouldn't we fast track them and find ways to get them into nursing and medicine and health professions. I'd be thrilled to talk with you and other people about anyone who wants to talk about it, about streams that we could create to open up new opportunities for Indigenous communities.
Thanks, Gil. We have Willem, but before I get Willem on, I just wanted to remind folks that you are great at answering questions, but I know sometimes you don't like to ask for the funds to keep your campaign going. And it would just remind people that it is expensive to be in this race. Every couple of weeks, the campaign needs to pay the central party $20,000 just for being around. So we do need the financial support. Gil needs your financial support to stay spreading his message. And if you went to the website, you can make a donation very simply. And of course, it has tax credits that make it affordable to be generous. So Willem, please ask your question. There you go.
My question is on carbon capture and storage. It's not directly a medical health scare related, but
that's okay.
What is your position on that? I have a position. I think it's a waste of money, and we're going to waste a lot of money. And the provincial government and the federal government is putting a lot of eggs in that basket, and I think we're wasting the effort. I'm a geologist, and I know there's chances that everything will leak out in 1,000 years, and then you've wasted your money.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question, Willem. And I think it's an important question, and honestly, it's a difficult one for me to answer because I've heard experts on both sides tell very compelling stories, and so and as the current president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, I'll be honest that these carbon capture projects would create a lot of work for Albertans, many of whom are members of unions that I represent, including my own home local of the Boilermakers. And so it's hard for me to sort of shrug off major projects that would create thousands of jobs and also throw a lifeline to the oil and gas industry so that they could continue in a changing world, right? Because the bottom line is that if climate change is real, we have to do our part to reduce emissions. Here in Alberta, Alberta produces 240, I think, or is it 270 megatons of emissions every year. About 60% of that comes from oil and gas, the majority of it coming from the oil sands. And and we have 12% of the population, 40% of the Canadian emissions. If we want to do our part, it means reducing emissions in the oil and gas sector. And what I've been told by the experts that I've talked about is that the only credible short-term and medium-term way that we can reduce emissions from oil and gas significantly is to use these technologies, these carbon capture and sequestration technologies. So obviously the industry has been convinced. The federal government has been convinced because they've earmarked billions of dollars, as you said, in investment tax credits for this purpose. So my feeling is that this is already, like, the train has left the station on this. The money is being put on the table, but you're not the first one, certainly, and you're a geologist, so your opinion is based on a really good understanding of the issue. So if I were as premier, I would take the concerns that you've raised very seriously. And honestly, the final thing I'll say two things. The first is that I would take those concerns very seriously, and we have to make evidence-based decisions, as opposed to decisions just based on the preferences of a particular incumbent in an industry, right? And the final thing I'll say, though, is you're right about the money. Like, we're talking about billions of dollars. The Pathways Alliance, for example, which is the alliance of the big oil sands companies, they have a a $15 billion plan for a carbon capture and sequestration network. And that's only the first phase. And they basically want the public, like taxpayers, to pay for most of it. And so my question is, if it's such a good idea, why are they asking the public to pay for most of it, especially at a time when these companies are recording record profits? So like if it's such a good idea and they have so much money on hand, which they do, why are they not paying for it themselves? So that's a question that troubles me. And so, the only, you can see the competing interests here, right? So what I would commit to you is that as Premier, instead of just being led along by the nose by industry lobbyists, which I think is what's happening, especially here in Alberta, but maybe to a lesser extent at the federal level, I would have a public conversation about this, and it would have to be a conversation based on evidence.
Gil, we've got a question typed in from Scott C., who says, Gil, there are a number of Ukrainian doctors here in Alberta not practicing medicine. Assuming you mean, Scott, you mean people who come as recent refugees. Does your plan have a path for them to get their credential recognized?
Thanks, Scott. Honestly, my platform does not deal with the issue of foreign credentialing. However, in response to the question, I want to make it really clear that I think that providing recognition of foreign credentials for people like these Ukrainian doctors who are coming here as refugees and potentially as citizens, I think that's got to be part of the solution. I do sort of lean towards training as many people domestically within the province as we can to help fill the need. But we are a country of immigrants, and one of our great successes as a country of immigrants is allowing people to come here and apply the skills that they've developed elsewhere to make their contribution. So if they're doctors, they should be able to work as doctors. Having said that, I want to recognize that we do have systems in place for credential recognition. This mostly is actually separate from government. In the case of doctors, it goes through the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which is the professional body that the doctors run for themselves. And so I don't want to step on their toes, because I know that they have public interest obligations to make sure that the credentials of people coming from abroad meet our standards here. And there is a public health and safety concern there, which is very legitimate. Having said that, like, if there's anything that I could do as Premier to expedite the process, I would definitely be willing to advocate for doctors in these kind of situations, not just from the Ukraine, but from elsewhere. But I'm not going to run roughshod over the professional organizations, whether it's doctors, nurses, whatever. They have a job to do. They have rules in place for a reason. I'd be happy to, as I say, to advocate and work cooperatively with these professional bodies. But I'm not going to make a promise that I just like push them aside, because I don't think that's appropriate for a government. So. But yeah, you raise a very important issue, and I would take it seriously, and I would do everything I could to advocate to make sure that doctors and other health professionals who have proper training have that training recognized, so they could actually practice in their chosen fields here in Alberta.
Thanks, Gil. And Odette, you have a question. Unmute yourself and ask Gil your question.
Hi there. So I live in a small municipality a few hours northwest of Edmonton. My question is kind of a broad campaign question, both for the leadership and then for the party. So what is the plan? I've heard several candidates talk about we need an 87 riding strategy to engage more people in rural Alberta. And I would love to know what some of those specifics
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the question, Odette. And I think I was actually the first one to use that phrase, an 87 riding strategy. In fact, when the five of us were at a rural constituency debate organized by a number of constituencies in southern Alberta, we met in Claire's home, and I'm a rural kid. I grew up in fact, when you say Northwest Alberta, our farm was between Dapp and Rochester. I went to high school in Westlock, so maybe we were neighbors. I don't know. Maybe you're a little bit further out, but yeah. So for as I've said at previous meetings and in the debate, we need to win the next election, and winning the next election depends on us being able to attract people to the party who are currently outside of the tent. One of the big groups that's currently outside of the tent are people outside the two big cities. I know sometimes the New Democrats will say, "Oh, we have one rural seat, Banff, Kananaskis," but I don't know about you, but having grown up in rural Alberta, I look at Canmore and Cochrane, and I say that's not rural. But yeah, so we like, you're right. We can't win unless we win more seats outside of the two big cities. And so, for me, the strategy would involve both politics and economics. So on the political side, we have to put our money where our mouth is. And so that means putting resources into an 87 riding strategy. So that's all the ridings, because you're not going to build new areas of strength if you're only just putting money into your current areas of strength. And so I would like to see more people hired explicitly to work in rural communities. I would like those people to be from rural communities so that they feel comfortable out there. And I don't want to cast dispersions or anything, but a lot of the people who work for the party, a lot of the people who are in the caucus, they're from big cities, and that's great. But there's a certain comfort level that you have to be effective in rural Alberta. And having grown up on a farm, and my first job was at a feedlot, and I went to junior high in a town of 250 people, and high school in a town of 5,000, right? So I feel comfortable in rural Alberta, but not all of our staff do, and members. So we got to build a comfort level. Second, we've got to find the right people, put them in the communities. And then we have to support our constituency associations, because they're the bedrock of the party, right? And or they should be. I'm afraid that over the last 10 years, maybe 20 years, we haven't given the constituency associations the central role that they need in order for us to be effective. So we need to provide constituency associations with support, with training, and also give them platforms, right? So if I were a leader, I would come out to the rural communities more often. I would bring members of the caucus with us. I would meet with the local constituency associations. I would meet with local municipal councils. And the thing about rural Alberta, and I actually, as Federation of Labor president, I just finished doing a tour of rural communities. And one of the things that it reminded me of is that when you show up in small communities, everyone pays attention in a way that they don't in the big city, right? You show up, and the local paper, the local radio, it's a big deal when someone shows up. And that's a huge opportunity for us to build profile for the party, for our candidates. And then the final point is on the political side is the candidates. The candidates have to come from the community in order to be credible and in order to win. And so we have to put a lot more effort into candidate search, candidate support. And honestly, the constituency associations have to play a central role in that process of finding, grooming, and supporting candidates. On the economic side, we need to start making economic offers that resonate with people in rural Alberta. And I'll just mention a few quickly, because the issues in rural Alberta are issues related to depopulation, right? It's hard to keep young people in the communities. I'm a living, breathing example of that. When I finished high school, there were no opportunities, so I went to the big city. So did a lot of my classmates. So we need more opportunities in rural communities. Just a few examples of the kind of thing that I would champion. In rural Alberta, there used to be a lot of people worked in oil and gas, especially oil field service, to supplement their incomes off the farm. And but those jobs are disappearing. We've lost like 40,000 jobs, mostly in oil field service. And as the companies automate, as they're not investing as much in new production, but there could be lots more. There could actually be more jobs, I think, in cleanup, because we have abandoned and orphaned wells all over the place. Companies are supposed to set money aside for reclamation and cleanup. They're required to by law, but the law is not being enforced. So that's one of the reasons I say I would fire the whole board of the Alberta Energy Regulator, replace it with citizen representatives from landowners, from municipalities, from labor, from business, from Indigenous communities. And one of the first orders of business would be to collect the money that should have been put on the table from these very profitable companies. So we have a big pool of money to deal with the $260 billion in oil and gas liabilities. And that creates jobs for the same kind of people who are working in oil field service. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of jobs for decades in cleanup. Also renewables, big industry, which the UCP has thrown a wet blanket over with restrictions, but it's primarily rural based. And so, whether it's wind farms, solar, there's jobs in construction, there's jobs in operation. There's also, supply chain jobs and service jobs related to the industry. The industry also generates all sorts of revenue for municipal tax bases. So there's opportunities there. And in fact, I was down in Pincher Creek on Friday. It was Friday, and I was meeting with a group of local business people, and they pointed out that we've got fiber optic cable running along the Crow's Nest Pass Highway, Highway 3, and there's networks all over the place. They're not adequately hooked up to all of our communities, but data centers. Okay, so data centers, as the world moves towards more AI, the demand for data is going to go through the roof. And Alberta is uniquely situated to build these things because with renewable energy, so windmills, solar, the cost of power is approaching zero in some cases, and which could attract these data centers. And we've got these fiber optic lines laid along our major highways. You hook into those, and then we could become a province that, surprisingly, like in a town like Pincher Creek, that could become a data center hub. So, my point is that there's all sorts of exciting economic opportunities that could be rural based and could be allowed to keep people in the community. So I'm actually kind of we're in the process at the Federation of Labor of doing this thing called Diversify Alberta Tour. It's about pivoting our economy towards new opportunities to keep Albertans working. And this has been sort of one of the focuses of my work for the last decade on economic diversification. And especially as a rural kid and someone who really believes in this province, both in the big cities and outside, the excitement that's out there for new opportunities, it's palpable, and it like the UCP is holding it back, right? I honestly believe that we have a really bright future, even as the global economy changes. But the problem is that the UCP is protecting incumbents in the utilities market, in the oil and gas, but because they see their main job as defending incumbents, we're missing opportunities with all these young, bright, smaller companies that could really generate a lot of economic activity and create employment, not just in the big cities, but also in the rural communities. So anyway, I could talk about this stuff for a long time, but I actually think that the New Democrats can win by becoming the party with a plan for economic growth and job creation, not just in the cities, but in rural Alberta. And I'm so enthusiastic about this. I think that enthusiasm could help us win in rural Alberta and in the process defeat the UCP in 2027 and beyond.
Thanks, Gil. I was going to go to Patricia next, but well, I'm not sure, Patricia, whether you took your hand down but over to you if you'd like to ask a question again.
Thank you. Yes, I have heard you speak before, Gil, and appreciate what you're saying about the gap in who's voting for NDP. And I'm in a riding, and I've done a lot of campaigning for previous NDP people in our area. And certainly that's what I've heard is when I go to a door and it's somebody from the working class, they almost always say, I'm not voting NDP. What would you suggest we say to people if you were the leader and not anti-UCP? What is your message in a succinct 2-minute door opportunity?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that just because we call ourselves the party of working people doesn't mean that we are. And in fact, you know, the right, not just here in Alberta, but across the country and indeed around the world, whether it's Pierre Poilievre at the national level or Donald Trump south of the border, they've been really successful in weaponizing very legitimate worker anxiety and turning it into anger, then using it for their own political purposes. So it's a real challenge, right? I mean, but we can't win unless we win working class voters back, and we should be trying to win them back because, you know, then the NDP is supposed to be the Workers' Party. It was founded as a historic partnership between the CCF representing farmers and the CLC representing workers. That's our tradition, where we're supposed to be a social democratic party that gives a voice to ordinary working people, right? And unfortunately, we're becoming, and like I get it. I mean, like we're becoming much more of a big city, urban-based party, university-educated people, and we need to keep all of those voters as part of the coalition. But in order to win, we have to attract more working class support, both in the big cities and outside. So for me, it's about showing rather than telling. Right. So because I you know, as a worker representative, I've heard New Democrat candidates say things like, you know, we're the Workers' Party, but the working people don't feel that. Right. So like you asked for like the elevator pitch. What I would say is that if I were the leader, you could say to them, we're a party under new management. The new leader of the NDP is a working guy who spent his whole life standing up for working people. And he believes, and we believe, that we need to still be the party of healthcare, education, and human rights, because that's who we are. But under new management, we're also the party of wage growth. We're the party with an economic plan to maintain our prosperity in a changing world. We're a party that's going to do real things to make life more affordable for you, like introducing public auto insurance, re-regulating power, you know, and now we're going to make sure that you're healthy in your workplace, because you know, the UCP is ignoring the you know, the health and safety in the workplace, especially in the context of the pandemic. So, you know, take a look at us again, right? Because like we found our way back to our roots, which is a working party, but we're not just a working person's party. But we're not just saying this. We're actually providing real life proof that's going to make your life better, right? And I think that's the key. It's like we can't just say it. We have to show it, and we have to actually you know, point to concrete things that will you know, increase people's wages, reduce their costs, create opportunities for themselves and their kids. Yeah, and so like, because I mean, I think part of the problem is that like, and I've, because as you can imagine, I spent a lot of time talking to working people, both public and private sector, and they think a lot of people who are not voting for us, they're not voting for us because we sort of allowed ourselves to be shrunk down into this little box, right? It's like they hear us saying things about, you know, public services, human rights, and the environment, and they say, okay, a lot of people say, okay, even if I agree with those things, it's not enough. It's got to be about the economy. And so we've sort of allowed ourselves to be put in this little box of those three things. So, public services, human rights, and the environment. I'm not saying we reject those things. That's who we are, but we have to add the meat and potato stuff, right? And that's the single biggest reason I threw my hat into this ring, because I'm a rural kid and I'm a worker advocate, and it's like a double gut punch to me when the party that was created for farmers and workers is no longer attracting farmers and workers. And I'm convinced that the reason we're no longer attracting rural Albertans and working Albertans is because we're not providing the meat and potatoes economic stuff that people need to hear, especially during an affordability crisis. So I think it's frustrating, but I think there's an opportunity. But we have to seize it. If we don't start talking about these meat potato, and I call them, like the small kitchen table economic stuff, as well as the big picture, like broader economy stuff. We got to talk about both, but we haven't been talking effectively about either, and that's the problem.
Gil, we scheduled to go to 5 o'clock, and it's 5:02 right now. But if you're not about to get to your kitchen table in a minute or so, we could maybe stay on for a few more minutes, because we do have a couple more people with hands up. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Gwendolyn. Has got a question for you. Please unmute and ask your question of Gil, Gwendolyn.
Hi, Gil. Nice to see you. First thing I want to say is thank you so much for putting your name forward. I actually think it's fabulous that we have people from outside of the party running to be leader of the party. There's so many things on your platform that I think are just so bang on. I love your insight into the economy and working people, and we need to bring it back there. As I think and most people know, I ran as a candidate in a rural riding, Brooks Medicine Hat, against Daniel Smith. And some of the things you've talked about are completely bang on, about the problems with the party being too Edmonton-centric in its approach, trying to get Calgary through an Edmonton-centric eye. Sorry, I am coming to my question.
That's okay. I love listening to you talk too, Gwendolyn.
I agree with you so much about the party staff. That needs to change. I know, because I'm now the president of the Constituency Association, and sometimes working with party staff, you are literally talking to people who have no clue what it's like to live in a rural riding. And I live in Medicine Hat, which is not even so rural. So my questions are this. So number one, I'm going to ask you this in this forum. We want you to come to Medicine Hat as a constituency association, so please set that up.
Yep.
And come out, and we'll do a town hall with you, because we're trying to get all of the candidates out, the leadership candidates out. Okay, that's number one.
Yep.
So can you carve out time for that?
Yes.
My second question is if you don't take the leadership, would you consider running as a Alberta NDP candidate? Now, I think you live in Edmonton. Am I correct on that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I think rumor has it if certain people win, there's going to be possibly some vacancies in the Alberta NDP, because some MLAs may decide to step down. And I'm not going to say names, but would you consider running as a candidate? Would be my second question. You don't have to answer it now. My third question is this, and I've asked this of pretty much all the people who are running for leadership. How would you feel about having a conversation with members about our relationship with the federal NDP party? Because particularly in rural Alberta, that tends to hurt us more than help us.
Yep.
People cannot distinguish between the Alberta NDP and the platform of the Alberta NDP and the much more left-wing federal NDP. So that's it for my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Gwendolyn. And it's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I thought you ran a fabulous campaign, and I actually knocked on doors for you when you were running against Danielle, and that was a lot of fun. I still remember being very pleased by how many people came to the door and quickly said that they're going to support you. And so, I think you did yeoman service to the party in your community, standing up to Danielle Smith, and I'm confident that next time you'll get her number. So your first question was, will I come to Medicine Hat? I was actually just in Medicine Hat this week, and I did, I think my campaign talked to some of your folks in the Constituency Association, but we couldn't quite set up a time. But I am committed to coming back. I really like Medicine Hat. It's a great community, and so I was actually a little sad that I wasn't able to coordinate my AFL work with the campaign when I was in town. So, but I am making a commitment to you that I will be there and to chat with your folks. The second question was, sorry, the second question was, what was the second question? I know what the third question was. So, will I come to Medicine Hat? What was the second question? Oh, would I run? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so yes, would I run? The short answer is yes. Right, but as you allude to, I mean, basically every seat in Edmonton is occupied by a New Democrat MLA right now. I haven't heard the rumors that you've heard about people stepping down, but every election, that it's not unusual for a number of people to step down. So, and then, and obviously, there's a chance that Rachel herself would step down now that she's stepped away from the leadership. So Edmonton Strathcona might be open. And if that's the case, and I've said this publicly before, that I'm not in a hurry to push Rachel out because I think she's not just a fabulous leader, but she's also a fabulous MLA. But if she were to step down and there was an open seat there, I would consider it. I actually lived in that community for about 10 years. It's where we moved after I went away for school and I came back, and after I got my first real job, it was a community where I lived with my wife, and it's where we had our kids. So I feel comfortable in that community, but I would consider others as well. So, but I can't, I don't want to, because I don't want to presuppose what other people do. But yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I would really, really, really like to be part of the next New Democrat government in this province. My preference would be that I would lead it as premier, but I'd be open to the idea of being part of the team. And I'm a good team player, always have been, and so so the short answer is yes. The last question. Now, I'm tired at the end of the day, Gwendolyn. What was the third question? So what was the third one? So the Medicine Hat, running, and can someone help me out here? What was the third question? Tom?
Sorry, I didn't note it.
Okay.
I'm drawing a blank like you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Gwendolyn.
I can try and find Gwendolyn again. It might take a minute. So
maybe if someone else knows what it is, put it in the chat.
Yes.
I'm embarrassed.
Well, we have Yessie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but who has a question for you?
Yeah.
Hi, Yessie. Can you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Gail.
Hi, Yessie. Is that Yessie Barrios?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Yes, I just got a quick question for you, and nice to see you again. My question is very short. If you win, what are your plans on supporting young workers, and if there will be a reversal of the wage cut?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question, Yessie. So what Yessie was referring to is the fact that very early in their mandate, the UCP cut the minimum wage for workers under 18 from $15 an hour to $13, which was completely unjustifiable because, and as a labor guy, I've always taken the position that people should get paid for their work, not for their age. And so, if someone is 16 or 17 years old and they're doing the same job as someone who's older than that, next to them, whether it's, working in a restaurant or in a grocery store and a warehouse. I mean, if they're lifting boxes or serving customers and doing exactly the same work, there's as older workers, there's absolutely no justification for paying them a lower wage. The UCP, when they introduced that, they basically said, "Oh, it's going to create more jobs for young people," and it didn't. Okay, so I also want to make it really clear: there was no bump in youth employment when they cut the wage. The employers just put more money in their pockets. So yeah, I mean, like for me, if I were premier, it would be, first session priority would be to increase the minimum wage, not just for young workers, but for everyone, because it's been 5.5 years that the minimum wage here in Alberta has frozen. It's been it's completely unconscionable because it was a period of the highest inflation that we've seen in 40 years. So the cost of living went up by 15%, but the minimum wage stayed the same. So what I would compensate for the inflation. So, and this is not a radical concept. Literally every province has surpassed us now, except for just one other province has a lower minimum wage than us now, even though we're the wealthiest province in the country. And so if we were to index the minimum wage for inflation over the last 5 years, the minimum wage should be about $17.50 an hour. That's consistent with what Ontario has just pegged it at, BC, the federal jurisdiction. But we're still 3 years away from an election, and the UCP has made it really clear that they have no intention of ever increasing the minimum wage. That's how bad they are. So I would inflation and adjust for whatever has been lost, and then put a mechanism in place for regular inflation adjustments every year, so that we don't fall behind again like this.
Okay, we've got a question from Tara, and it's almost a quarter after, so I know an hour and a half, 15 minutes is a long time to talk, especially in this format deal. So maybe we'll take Tara's question and wrap it up.
Yeah, and then we did figure out what Gwendolyn's last question was. It was about the relationship with the federal party. So I'll answer that too, but I'll take this from, yeah.
So Tara, you're just on mic, unmute, and you can ask the question.
Hi, Gil. We have met at least a few times in the history of Alberta's fuck up. Excuse my language. As you know, probably know me as a disability self-advocate, particularly on autism and ADHD.
Yes.
Given the circumstance that Alberta has no protections for people with disabilities, and employers are still allowed to call us a liability, how do you aim to fix this?
Yeah. Tara, the last time I spoke with you, and then again today, I have to acknowledge that I am not, up on disability issues, and it's one of those areas that I really have to educate myself on. So I don't know the gaps in the system. I don't know the challenges that people in your circumstance are facing. So I have to learn more, and so if I were chosen as leader, and then if I became premier, I would make a point of learning more about the challenges faced by the disability community. So I talked about home care a little bit, but I know that's only just a piece of the puzzle. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with AISH. There's all sorts of problems, as you said, in the labor market, and people with disability. I mean, especially we have tighter labor markets now. We have all sorts of employers, crying labor shortage, even though the economy is slowing down. They're still, they're claiming labor shortage and looking for all sorts of special dispensation from governments. But if it's true that, and I think it's only partially true that there's such a worker shortage, then employers should be doing a heck of a lot more to open doors for the disabled community. And so that's a long way of saying that I need to know more. I would be very welcome. I would be very thankful to be able to sit down with people like you, Tara, and others to educate me, and we can come up with strategies so that disabled people can live, full, meaningful lives of dignity and independence. Right. That for me, that would be the priority. And I just want, like, on a more personal note, and this actually,
Then I invite you before you win
Yeah,
to invite me to your desk.
Yes, I will. I will. I just want to let you know that I have a close family member who is disabled and suffers with some chronic mental illness, and he really struggled in Alberta, and then he moved about 20 years ago to Vancouver, and the difference was night and day in terms of the public supports that were available to him. And what I saw is that with the support of provincial and municipal services that were available in Vancouver that are not available here, he went from struggling to thriving. And I think it's an indictment of our province that when we know we can, make the lives of disabled people more meaningful and more stable and more full, and with more dignity, we know we can do that. We choose not to. That's a despicable choice. And so yeah, you've motivated me more to learn more about this, about what's going wrong with the system for disabled people in Alberta, and I'll take you up on that. And actually, if you can send me some contact information, we'll sit down and I might even put out a plank just on disabilities. And okay, there was one. We figured out what the final question was from Gwendolyn, and I apologize, Gwendolyn. I have to admit I'm getting tired. So the third question was, what about the relationship with the federal party? And I'll just cut to the chase. I do not support separating from the federal party for a number of reasons. The first is that in my experience, the relationship with the federal party is one of the things that voters say when they say they're not voting for the NDP, but my sense it's never been the main issue. It's just one of those things that people say when they're piling on about why they're not going to support the NDP. So I'm not convinced that separating from if the only thing that we did was separate from the federal party, I'm not convinced that would improve our electoral prospects. And I do think it's sort of one example of how we spend a lot of time as New Democrats worrying about and responding to talking points from the UCP. The Not Leasing Alliance and blah, blah, blah. I actually think we should spend less time thinking about what they say about us and more time thinking about what we should say to voters. I don't like being, spending all our time being responsive. And Jack Layton was famous for saying we should, instead of just opposing, we have to propose. And that's my big thing. We have to be more propositional instead of talking about, instead of allowing the UCP to constantly set the agenda, we should be setting the agenda for ourselves on those issues. And all those issues I've talked about so far in this Zoom meeting and that I address on the website, those are the kind of things, those propositional things, is where I think we should spend our time. I also think when we're talking about separating from the federal party, we need to do a real cost-benefit analysis. And as I just said, I'm not convinced that there are a whole lot of benefits, but there are costs, right? So because we're one big party operating in the same province, we share very practical things like databases. We make use of the same party staffers to help organize campaigns. So we would be losing something real and I'm afraid we wouldn't be getting that much in return. And then the final thing I'll say, well, two final things, is that if we were to separate from the federal party, I'm afraid that would hurt the prospects of the New Democrats we've elected at the federal level, who are fabulous. And I want to just make it really clear, because as Federation of Labor president, I do a lot of lobbying with all levels of government, including the federal government. And over the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time working with the Liberal minority government and the federal NDP opposition. And I just want to say that we are really well served by our current NDP MPs, Heather McPherson and Blake Desjardins. These two are rock stars, right? And if we were to separate from the federal party, I'm afraid that it would make it harder for them to win re-election, and that would be a huge loss to the province. And so related to that, I think that if we have concerns about the federal party, and I get it, they've been painted as these crazy radical extremists who are enemies of Alberta. I don't buy that for a minute. That's just a UCP talking point. It's not reality. And we shouldn't be making our decisions based on UCP talking points. The real way forward, I think, is just to elect more Alberta members of Parliament to join Heather and Blake, and so make the Alberta caucus bigger. And they're already punching above their weight. I don't know how many of you follow what's going on in Ottawa, but both of them punch way above their weight, like Blake was sort of one of the leading MPs in the negotiations on the supply and confidence agreement that gave us, dental care and pharmacare and anti-scab legislation, which we in the labor movement have been asking for a long time. Like Blake was in there with his sleeves rolled up, and Heather is probably one of the most eloquent members of Parliament, not just from the New Democrat caucus, but from any caucus, right? I mean, these people are doing our province proud, and we just need more of them, right? I think that's the solution. So anyway, I would oppose severing ties with the federal party for those reasons.
Hey, thanks, Gil. Do you have, before we sign off and go have supper, do you have any final thoughts to leave folks with about healthcare or anything else tonight?
No, I just want to say I really enjoyed this, and I'm glad that so many people joined us. It was a really good conversation. You guys are giving me a lot. After the debate, I got a lot of really positive and encouraging emails and texts and stuff. And I just want to say, you guys are you're buoying me up, And I got into this race a little bit late, and I had a lot of ground to make up. But you guys are making me feel like that maybe some of the others have peaked too soon, and we're peaking just at the right time. So, but with that, I want to reiterate Tom's point that the party has made it really expensive for us to be in this race, and I can't, even though I'm a union leader, unions can't make donations, so I'm relying on folks like you to get over the next fee hurdle. So I think I've got another 10 days to raise another $20,000 just to stay in the race. And unlike perhaps some of the other candidates, the people who are donating to us can't afford to make big donations, so they're coming in small batches, and so I just need more of them. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you like what you're seeing from our campaign, please consider making a donation so that we can stay in the race and make things interesting. But with that, I think I'm really tired. It's been a long week, so I'm gonna say goodnight and hopefully find some supper, and I hope you do too. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good night.